obviously that this is the most significant area of the Bible. Hebrews teaches us about sacrifice. Romans teaches us about grace. But Jesus teaches us about daily living. What should your mindset be? How should you be thinking as you go about your day? What should be your priorities when you're looking at a situation and when you're judging whether, how you should go about interacting with life and with the circumstances of life? So starting in chapter 10, verse 46, we read of an incident where Jesus was walking to Jericho. And somebody read verses 46 to the end of the chapter, please. Mark chapter 10, 46 through 52.
Now they came to Jericho. As he went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the road begging. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Then many warned him to be quiet, but he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. So Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. Then they called the blind man, saying to him, Be of good cheer, rise, he is calling you. And throwing aside his garment, he rose and came to Jesus. So Jesus answered and said to him, What do you want me to do for you? The blind man said to him, Rabboni, that I may receive my sight. And Jesus said to him, Go on your way, your faith has made you well. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the road.
Whenever I read this story, and there's others like it that make me think about this, we cannot imagine what it's like to be a beggar in the first century. We have people today who you might be on the roadside, at an intersection with a can, hoping for help. But we have safety nets. We have charitable organizations in this town. We have various ways where people have every reason for us to believe that they should be able to get decent food for every day, clothes to wear, even in the coldest of times. That's not very cold in South Georgia, but we can have some cold days. And they can even get medical care at emergency rooms and things like that. Not the best of circumstances, but it is something. When you were a beggar in ancient times, and in other times, even other places in the world right now, there is no safety net. Your back is against the wall. If you're not, I was talking to a friend about this today. He said he went into one fast food restaurant one morning, and a fellow was there, probably a homeless man, who was just taking the creamers, the coffee creamers, out of the container and had a bunch of creamers in it. He said he sat there and drank about 30 of them, because I'm sure he didn't have any money, and that milk actually is digested as a solid, so maybe he thought that would give him some type of relief from the hunger pains that you have when you're hungry. But in many places in the world today, and certainly in ancient times, if you didn't collect, you didn't eat. You just went hungry. And if somebody didn't care, these were hard times. They were an oppressed people, dominated by Rome, that had pretty high standards for these provinces to produce taxes. And life was difficult. And so he's begging, and he hears, when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he'd heard about Jesus. You remember at the end of the book of Luke, when Cleopas and another disciple that's not named is walking on the road to Emmaus, and Jesus, in disguise, starts walking with them, and he says, "Why are you so troubled, and what are you talking about?" And they said, "Man, where have you been?" Everybody knows about Jesus. And I'll guarantee you that every man who was hoping for a miracle knew about Jesus. I mean, the word would spread among beggars and leprous people and everybody who had any kind of a serious physical malady that kept them from leading a normal life. And so as soon as he heard it was Jesus, he starts crying out all the more. So what did the people do? Some of the people did what? Told him to be quiet. Don't bother the master. This is a common thing. And it's kind of funny. I'm sure our mindset and our culture may be different. We live in a time where it is a given. Everybody knows that you ought to help. Okay, now, I'm sure that there is a portion of our population who would not help, but not too many people can argue against the fact that it is a good thing to help somebody when they're down. Now, some people would argue you can't help people too much. You better to teach them how to fish and to give them a fish and all these things like that kind of stuff, you know. But it is always a good thing to be mindful of others and to make a judgment about whether you can afford to or should help in a given situation. Leave it like that. Not all cultures are like that. There are some cultures that are much harsher than that. Some peoples that don't have a lot of patience for beggars. What is an idea that a lot of people have about someone whose life is broken to the degree that they can't work and take care of themselves? Whose fault is that in the minds? In some cultures, they find fault with the person who's downtrodden. He must have done something real terrible, and God now has put a curse on him or afflicted him in some way. Or, he made his bed by a stupid living, and he just needs to lie in it. He's getting what he deserves and things like that. But Jesus teaches us to be compassionate. Jesus teaches us to be careful about judging other people. And if you are harshly judged, don't complain if you harshly judge others, don't complain when you are harshly judged. And there is kind of the implication, and I think we could frame it in a way that would be completely in keeping with the principles of Scripture, that if we are too harsh in our judgment, that we'll receive the same kind of judgment from God. That's what James 2:12 seems to indicate, that judgment without mercy will receive no mercy. And so we need to make a judgment with mercy. I think generally we should say that if we err, we need to err on the side of mercy rather than erring on the side of austerity or harshness. I know that you should not enable people in sin. You should not help them to live a decadent life or a lazy life or gluttonous life or something like that. But whatever the circumstance, and we want to get it right. I'm not saying that we need to purposefully get it wrong, but if we do err, let it be on the side of mercy. And Jesus, what was it about? And I keep trying to think of ways to ask questions but I really can't. Jesus could see this man's heart, right? He understood this man. A lot of people would look at the blind beggar and they wouldn't think about his heart. They would think about his lost sight, his inability, his need for help, all the physical things of his life, and yes, they're real. Somebody says, well, why does God allow things like that to happen? Why does God allow blindness to happen? Why does God allow men like Bartimaeus to have been afflicted in this way? You remember the disciples asked in John chapter 9, the disciples, the apostles, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? It was blind. And so why does God allow that kind of suffering sometimes in life? To what benefit could it possibly be?
Well, it benefits the Christians, that helps.
It
gives joy it gives joy to the angels and God.
Sure.
The Christian helps someone who's...
Okay, and I'm going to tweak that just a little bit. It's well said, but it also gives opportunity. How often do we have an opportunity to see how much we truly love the Lord? Do I love the Lord more than money? Sometimes I pass a guy who needs some help. I'm not going to give him money, but I'll go buy him some food or something like that. Am I willing to do that? Or I've got to be careful because I got that new fishing rod I want to get, or I've got that new TV I want to buy, that smart TV, a great big one's going to fit in our living room, and I got to scrimp and save every dime I've got. Maybe I can help him next week. See, these are opportunities we have to prove to ourselves. Now, God knows the condition of your heart and mind, just like he knew the condition of Bartimaeus' heart. Okay? But we need to prove to ourselves that we love God more than money. We love God more than things. It doesn't mean that we give away everything we have to the degree that we don't have enough even to take care of our families. That's not what that means. You make good judgment, but let that judgment be with mercy. What's a good way to, if you don't feel, some people disdain beggars and things like that. What's a good way to soften your heart and maybe to change it from being harsh or hard-hearted toward that person to being more compassionate?
Try to have empathy.
Put yourself in their shoes. What would it be like if the roles were reversed and that man was coming to me? How would I act? And it's so easy for us to be critical. Well, I would help him, but he's got a snotty attitude. Well, and I understand some people can be difficult to deal with. But why are you helping someone? Are you helping this guy because he deserves it? Why are you helping him?
Because he's a child of God.
Because he's a creature of God, because Jesus died for me, because he has directed me to be merciful. I'm doing it for him, not for him. And I need to learn that. So I don't need to worry too much. I realize that some judgment could come into play regarding attitudes in the extreme, but 9 times out of 10, don't pay attention to that. Do your duty to God. He deserves it, whether the guy you're helping deserves it or not. Casey, you had your hand up.
I was just wanted to say that regardless of your station in life, regardless of the size of your bank account, they're all only one or two really poor decisions away from being in that same spot.
Yeah. They recommend that you have 3 months, enough money set aside to pay all your bills for 3 months. Very few of us have that kind of money set aside. We should, but we don't. But don't think that 3 months can't go by, and eventually you're going to run out. And most of us live paycheck to paycheck. That means if we miss one paycheck, all of a sudden, and how many people today are using their credit cards just to buy food at the grocery store? And I'm not talking about your debit card, I'm talking about credit cards. And they're paying minimums. These reports are coming out that more and more people right now are paying minimum than are paying enough to stay ahead of the credit card. So we're going to reach a crunch here probably in the next 6 months to a year. And now they're talking recession again. They thought we might have missed it, but now they're talking it again. We need to be mindful. A lot of your friends, people that have cars and houses and jobs, they may be in trouble. And the sad thing about credit card debt or something like that, I mean, it's not a matter of buying a meal. I mean, people can get in trouble and you will not be able to help them. They're going to have to go to some, credit advisor and work with the companies. But we need to recognize that life can turn on a dime for many of us. And we need to be thoughtful and mindful of others. And we really do need to go through the day trying to put ourselves in the shoes of others to try to build some type of empathy. Blind Bartimaeus. What did Jesus say to him about being made well? What has made him well? His faith. Now, that's an interesting statement. So, was it always essential that a person believe that Jesus is the Messiah or that he was a man of God for people to be healed? Was anybody healed in the New Testament who didn't know who was healing them and therefore couldn't really have faith in God? Well, there was the centurion who had a servant. We don't know anything about the servant. About the lame man in Acts 3. He put out his hand to receive money from Peter. Now, if he knew who Peter was, in fact, I think, didn't Peter say on that occasion, if you knew what I could give you, you would ask? And he gave him, he said, silver and gold have I none, but such as I have I give to you. In the name of Jesus Christ, arise and walk. So, and Jesus on one occasion said, if you knew what I had to give, I don't remember the exact context, but the point is, having faith in Jesus was not it's a requirement to be healed. Some people were healed without it. They had no idea who was healing them. So what do you make of this statement, your faith has made you whole?
Yeah, they have faith.
Well, in Bartimaeus' case, and I guess we need to stick with the context here and not talk about miraculous healings that are not in front of us. But in this particular case, Bartimaeus did exercise great faith. He said what? What did he call Jesus? Son of David. What does that mean? The Messiah. That's right. Another key word that you'll notice when they ride into Jerusalem on the colt of a donkey, they started saying Hosanna. Hosanna is another important word connecting Jesus as the Messiah to the prophecies. And Son of David is one of them as well. So Bartimaeus was sure that this is the Messiah. So he had faith. And I think what we can say is that God blesses those who have faith more than he blesses those who don't have faith. I mean, that's just a general observation we could make. We know that to be true spiritually, but people who have faith are God's children. And we're always going to take care of our children, maybe a little bit better than we would other people's children, though we'll help them too as we have opportunity. So we have an obligation to help our own children, right? Okay, you have an obligation to help your children even if you don't get to eat, even if you don't get... But now other people's children, you don't have the same kind of obligation. But you would like to help them and often will if you can. And God's going to do the same thing. So when you exercise faith, it's going to certainly bring God's blessings in your life. I think Brandon had your hand up, and I think maybe Buddy did. Okay, all right, Brandon.
Another story here and about this faith is not necessarily going on with the world around you. There's certainly some, be quiet, hush up, and he's going against the norm or against the world in this case and professing, he's not saying his faith, but of who he is. And so that's another line point here, is that you don't necessarily have to
In Acts, the 5th chapter, actually in chapter 4, he says, whether it is right for us to listen to you or God, you judge, but we cannot but speak the things that we have seen and heard. So Peter they were telling him, commanding him not to speak in the name of Jesus. That's the command they had. Well, God had already told him to go into all the world and preach the gospel. So should I obey you or should I obey God? You make that judgment as to what I should do, but what we're going to do is continue speaking. And they went immediately from there over to the temple, started preaching and teaching in Jesus' name, and were arrested again coming to chapter 5. In fact, anyway, so it is important that we speak. It's a part of our faith to speak as we have opportunity. And I know that I'm not saying that we would halt, go into a restaurant, disrupt things, or, if City Hall's having a meeting, a city commissioners meeting that we use good judgment, but generally in our life, we continue preaching and teaching. We don't let others stop us from doing that. That's a mark of our faith. And that's a great thing that Bartimaeus did. He would not be quiet. And what did it say that he did after he was healed and given sight? He followed Jesus down the road. And I don't know how far he followed Jesus, whether he became, because most commentators believe that Jesus had his disciples, and he took responsibility for training his disciples and preparing them for when he would not be. But there were also, in addition, other people who would walk along with them where they were going when they could. And then some of them may have to leave to go back to work or to go get something to eat, and then might join them again later. But they kind of had continued to have these. One other thing I want to mention, what question did Jesus ask Bartimaeus?
What do you want me to do for you?
Okay. It occurs to me that when I go to God, I know sometimes there are things that occur to me while I'm praying, but I need to kind of understand what I want God to do for me. And my prayers need to be not ramblings. And it doesn't, not that that's always wrong, but there needs to be some purpose in our prayer. If God looked down at me and I'm seeking his help, I'm telling him about this problem, and he might say to me metaphorically, well, what do you want me to do for you? What is your prayer? And why did Jesus ask him that? Anybody would know what Bartimaeus wants him to do. I think he's telling us, crystallize your thoughts, think about it, because what we ask God can often show our priorities. If we're asking for earthly things, monetary things, selfish things, well, that pretty much shows God where our heart is. Or are we asking for opportunity to serve him, even if it means sacrifice and persecution and people rejecting me and things like that? Something to think about. Okay, let's go over to Luke chapter 19 now. Luke chapter 19. I did not put the schedule together that I used in putting this book together. Whoever did put it together was trying to put these events together chronologically. And you may have, what is the book that I have that puts the harmony? Is it Harmony of the Gospel? Something like that. And so often I can look at that and it'll put all the stuff together in one. It's interesting to read. So somebody read the first 9 verses. Luke 19, 1 through 9.
Then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. Now behold, there was a man named Zacharias, who was a chief tax collector in Judea. And he sought to see who Jesus was, but could not because of the crowd, for he was of short stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said to him, Zacharias, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house. So he made haste, came down, and received him joyfully. But when they saw it, that all the complaining, saying, he has gone to be the guest with a man who is a sinner. Then Zacharias stood and said to the Lord, look, Lord, I give half of all my goods to the poor, and if I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation,
Okay, add verse 10, I'm sorry.
For the Son of Man has come to seek and save that which was lost.
Okay, so what was Zacchaeus' vocation? What was his position? He was a chief tax collector. So tax collecting in ancient times, obviously they're employed by Rome to collect taxes from the Jews. These most often would be Jews who would be going to visit Jews to collect the taxes. They were viewed by the Jewish leaders and a lot of the Jews in general with very evil thoughts. Why?
Because a lot of times they would keep a lot of it for themselves.
Well, what the rule with the Rome was, you have Rome's authority to collect whatever taxes you want to collect. As long as we get this amount, whatever over that, as long as you don't cause unrest, we don't want the people marching in the streets, we don't want to hear about any of this. It's your business how you run, and whatever you collect over that. And a lot of them did collect really heavy taxes. And listen, if you didn't pay your taxes, he just turns your name into Rome as you were unwilling to pay your taxes. And so they were hated. In addition to that, they had some other arguments they could make against them. They were in league with Gentiles to oppress Israelites. Okay, that just seems prima facie, just as that's just got to be wrong in the minds of some Jews. That just had to be, there's no way that could be right. You're going and you're doing business with Gentiles. You're making yourself unclean by exchanging money and things like that that they have touched. And you are helping Rome fleece your brethren. And that's just despicable in the minds of the Jews. Why is that despicable? I suspect that the heart of the animosity against the tax collectors was in the fact that they were taking money, good money from good Jews and giving it to these heathen Gentile Romans. It's about money. It's about what I can't keep for myself, and I wish it, I suspect that, some tax collectors, I imagine in my mind, there would be some men who were sincere, who found themselves in the employ of Rome to collect taxes, okay? And they're sincere. Even if they didn't collect exorbitant taxes, they're still going to be viewed in the same way. Because there's this expression that Jesus was eating with tax collectors and sinners. So all tax collectors would be associated with sinners. So I'm sure some of them just said, well, if they're going to think of me like that, I might as well collect enough to be comfortable. So Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector. So you would think that he had a certain number of tax collectors under him who would go to different portions of the area. Jericho's a big city, and collect. And then they would give him the money, and he would take that money to the Romans, right? So he gets his share. They got all their share, now he gets his share, and then Rome gets their share. Everybody's supposed to be happy, except ain't nobody happy, except the tax collectors, I guess you could say. Chief tax collector. Why could he not see Jesus as he was coming along? Okay, there's a crowd, and a lot of the crowd was taller than Zacchaeus. He was a short guy, and so he does what in order to be able to see Jesus? He had heard all these stories. He just wants to see, what does he look like? I want to see him. He runs ahead of the crowd, climbs up in the sycamore tree, and he's sitting up there in a tree. A grown man has climbed a tree. I wonder how many years it had been since he'd climbed a tree. He climbs up a tree, he's sitting in that tree, and along comes Jesus, and he stops and looks right up at Zacchaeus and says, come on down, I'm going to your house today. That's just so surreal that I can only imagine what was going through his mind and the feelings, the emotions that he was experiencing at that time. And so he is jubilant. I mean, Jesus is coming into his house. He has a house that is well suited for visitors. It's not some tiny little mud hut. It's probably, pretty spacious. He's got furniture and things like that Jesus can sit on, and he's got food that's going to be prepared, maybe some servants to help and things like that. That really isn't the reason that Jesus picked him, though. I believe it was another reason. So what did Zacchaeus say to Jesus as they were dining together? He makes this declaration. This would be verse 8. Yeah. Half his goods to the poor.
And if he gets anything by false accusation, he uses the word, he repays
Fourfold. Now, you can imagine that a man who works for the Romans and is a chief tax collector has some influence and some clout among Rome. If he had a beef with another Jew, he could probably just put a word into the prefect or somebody like that, or to some cabinet member, whatever they would call themselves, who could get word up to the proper judge to take care of the matter. But that's not what he wanted to do. He wanted to. Why did he say fourfold? It was the law. The law. But as we see in so many areas, the Pharisees and the chief priests were great examples of it. The Jews understood the law, but they didn't always follow the law, So he's letting Jesus know that he wants to be a faithful child of God. Understand they're still under the old law, and he quotes in terms of people who have a just accusation against him, he restores what he took fourfold. There are a lot of circumstances in life, for instance, that you can actually cheat somebody without intending to cheat somebody, right? It can just happen by accident. Remember when I was growing up on the farm, a lot of times, very few farmers had every kind of implement that they use in a year. We'd borrow from one another, go over to this farm to borrow the hay baler, go over to this farm to borrow something else, and some people come to our farm and borrow different things that we might have. Dad always said that be sure you return what you borrow in at least as good a condition as you got it. And if that means it broke while it's in your possession, then you go and buy another one. And that was his rule, and he lived by that rule. So a lot of times we find out that somebody was cheated. We had no idea it happened, but it kind of is our responsibility by circumstance. Some people fuss. Well, I didn't mean to do that, so I'm just not going to do anything about it. Just it's old. It wouldn't. It's about to break anyway. And I've talked to a lot of people who've briefly they got into the business of loaning things to people that needed them or asked for them, and after a few people kind of brought back something that was broken, they decided to quit that policy. Zacchaeus is letting Jesus know that he wanted to live right. And so Jesus makes this statement that today salvation has come to this house. Commentators kind of debate or have discussed in the commentaries whether Zacchaeus is telling Jesus what he has always done or what he was going to do. I tend to think that Zacchaeus is repenting and turning to a more faithful service to God, because Jesus makes a statement, today salvation has come to this house, as if it perhaps wasn't come to this house before, because Zacchaeus had maybe lost his way. It would be easy to get involved with business, success of business. Everybody's patting you on the back and telling you what a great person you are. You're moving up in the community, even though there's some people still complain about you. You're a man of some influence, and you begin to, you harden your heart against the religious people. They're mad at you, the Pharisees and other people like that. Sometimes there's people that harden their heart against all religion because of some of these things. And we need to recognize God's got to work on their heart. And for whatever reason, Zacchaeus wanted to do what is right. And Jesus makes a statement that he also is a son of Abraham. So as you think about tax collectors who were helping Rome collect taxes from God's people, whose idea was the occupation? Whose idea was it for Rome to control Israel at this time? It was God's idea. This was God's work. This is the result of the Israelites through the years not being faithful. I can't remember which of the prophets, but with one of the prophets, the people were saying at that time what a burden they were bearing because their forefathers were unfaithful. So now we're in captivity because our forefathers had nothing to do with us because we were born in captivity and now we're suffering. And the prophet said, no, don't try that because you've got plenty of sins yourself. And sometimes we tend to be that way. We tend to say that because I haven't, our forefathers got us here. But what were these Jews doing? Jesus complained constantly about their hypocrisy. And not just the Pharisees and scribes. He complained about a lot of the Jews. And so, this was God's idea, this occupation. And that helps us to realize that if our world is turning darker, seems to have been pushing in that direction. What will happen in the coming years, we don't know for sure. But if our world is getting darker and things are going to get harder for Christians, we need to understand that even in situations that we realize are not most conducive to doing God's will, we can still find a way to still be faithful to God. If we really want to, we have to be willing to make a sacrifice, maybe even willing to be persecuted, maybe even willing to be thrown in jail at some point. That's what happened to the Christians. But we can find a way, even in difficult circumstances, to continue to be faithful to God. Any other thoughts? Any other thoughts or questions about Zacchaeus? I guess we could end by noting this statement in verse 10 that I almost left off. For the Son of Man has come to seek and save that which is lost. On one occasion, they complained that Jesus was eating with tax collectors and sinners, and Jesus called himself the great physician. He said, I didn't come here for those who are well. I came here for those who are sick. It's interesting you think about those who are well versus those who are sick. In that particular case, the people that are well, some of the people that are well actually were the people that needed Jesus, but they didn't want to come to Jesus. They weren't willing to listen to Jesus. The sinners and the tax collectors were coming to Jesus. And that's who Jesus. So God's going to notice us, listen to us, help us. We've got to make the decision. He came to seek and save the lost. Am I going to recognize my need? I'm lost. I need him. Or am I going to decide that I don't need him? Because I'm educated, I'm a hard worker, I've made a good living, got a good family, they're all good kids, so I'm good. So a lot of people are that way about religion. Casey?
One of the great ironies of the New Testament is oftentimes the Gentiles would display faith much greater than children of Abraham would.
We have to be very careful because when, we're Christians and we're God's children. This is what the Israelites would say. We're the people of God. There's only one people of God. It's not the Egyptians, not the Moabites, it's not the Babylonians. It's us. And they were quite proud of that. But whenever our connection to, and we need to be, proud's not the best word. Help me with the word that is correct. We need to feel good about our connection to God. It's something to appreciate. But when it causes us to exalt ourselves and look down our noses on other people, there's an old saying I heard, you can't look down your nose at somebody while you're washing, or about washing feet, but whatever it is, if you determine to help people, then you will not tend to look down your nose at people. At least you'll have the opportunity to have a better attitude about these things. Okay, we don't have time for the parable of the minas, so we'll just stop there. And we'll start in chapter 19, verse 11 then, and I'm marking it right now. Amen.